Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is 11:30, so I think we're going to just get started and jump right into it. Thank you so much for everyone joining our Medicaid 101 webinar. We greatly appreciate you being here, sharing your lunch period with us. So thank you for sharing your time with us. Now, this event is made possible through the partnership with UpLift, the Central Iowa Basic Income Pilot, and our amazing partners at Disability Rights Iowa. Next slide, please, Jenny. Now, before we dig into the amazing content that we have prepared for all of you today, there are just a few housekeeping things that I'd like to cover. First and foremost is that it's important that your Zoom name reflects your registered name. That way, there are no delays or issues with processing the CMEs or certificates of attendance. So just make sure that your Zoom name accurately reflects and matches the name that you used when you registered for this event. You can do this by clicking the Participants tab at the bottom of your screen, switching over to the Attendees tab, selecting More when you hover over your name, and then clicking Rename. Also, be sure to mute your microphone during today's presentation so we can ensure that everyone can hear today's speakers. You'll see that today's webinar is being captioned by Kim and our ASL interpreters for today are Eloisa and Jody. So thank you so much to them and Deaf Services Unlimited for helping us make today's event accessible for our attendees. Now we do have a spotlight on them, so hopefully you can see them easily throughout the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will then be posted online afterwards at our website, upliftiowa.org. We will also send a follow-up email with this recording in case if you would like to share that out, but just in case if you missed that, you can always go to our website, Uplift Iowa, to find that recording. We will also have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please use that Q&A chat box to send us any questions that you have throughout the presentation. And then finally, all attendees will receive a certificate of attendance for the CMEs being provided. We will have a little bit more information to come after the presentation. But I think that's it. So let me introduce myself. My name is Michael Berger, and together with my colleague Ashley Ezio, we make up the project coordination team for Uplift, the Central Iowa Basic Income Pilot. Today's webinar is a part of our efforts to really engage community in meaningful conversations around economic mobility and community well-being. Next slide, please, Jenny. Oh, perfect. All right. But in case if you haven't heard of Uplift before, no worries. What we are is a community learning opportunity brought together by 11 different funders that represent the private, public, philanthropic, and nonprofit sectors. All of our funders are dedicated to finding innovative solutions to poverty. Next slide, please. Actually, wait, no, stay on that side. Sorry, Jenny. Go back one. All right. What we are, though, is Uplift is a randomized controlled trial study that involves 110 participants receiving a monthly income payment of $500 every month for 24 months. We do have a control group that is a part of this study that consists of 140 participants that agreed to be in our control group. Now, they don't receive the monthly income payments, but their experiences that we have been collecting through surveys are going to be used as a comparison to the experiences of those that are in the intervention group. Now, excitingly enough, our final findings will be coming out this summer, so please stay tuned for when those come out. The best way to do that is through our quarterly newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website, upliftiowa.org. We're really excited for this. It's been 2 years coming, so please plug in, sign up for that quarterly newsletter, and we'll make sure that you get access to that once it's available. Now, beyond that research study, Uplift is dedicated to hosting a community-wide conversation around poverty and potential solutions through our community conversation series, which this webinar is a part of. Our partnership with Disability Rights Iowa has been crucial to curating conversations about social safety net programs and how they can be accessed and utilized. So today we are very, very excited to partner with the Work Incentives Planning and Assistance, or WIPA team, to bring you this webinar focused on Medicaid. Over the course of the project, through the stories and experiences from Uplift participants and community members, we've really seen how having access to affordable health care is one of the major pillars to building a healthy community, a strong workforce, and it can even help reduce poverty. So, with this growing conversation around healthcare access, we really wanted to provide this educational opportunity to give folks that work with our communities a chance to have that deeper understanding of what Medicaid is and the role it plays for so many of our neighbors with accessing the care that they need. Now, this was in our email, but just as a reminder, this presentation is just going to remain as a high overview of what Medicaid looks like today and the ways that people can be eligible for it. We know there is a lot of conversations and questions about upcoming changes to Medicaid, but this presentation won't be covering those just because there are still so many unknown on what those changes look like once they are finally implemented. Now, if you would like more information about what these changes are going to look like, you can explore a few resources that we have gathered for you today that focus specifically on what HR 1 includes and how experts are talking about that. So Ashley is going to throw that into the chat for you all. If you're curious, be sure to check those out if you want some more information. And so next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Now, as a supplement, though, to this presentation, we did work also with Disability Rights Iowa to create this informational publication that really digs into the functions of Medicaid, different ways people can be eligible for assistance, current data on the impacts of Medicaid in the state and rural communities, and also we've included some helpful resources for folks if they're trying to apply for Medicaid. Now, Ashley is going to put another link into the chat that will take you to this. This is our release, though, for this publication. You'll be able to find it on our website as well underneath the publications tab. So please be sure to share this out with people if you think it would be helpful to them and to spread it with your networks. And we appreciate you doing that. But as you flip through this publication, if you do have any questions, please be sure to put those in the Q&A chat box, and we'll be sure to answer those. And then next slide, Jenny. Awesome. And so there is a lot of content that we do need to cover, so I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves today. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to our friends at Disability Rights Iowa for our presentation on Medicaid. Thank you all for being here again, and thank you to Misty, Tammy, Jenny, and Emily for being here and leading this conversation on an incredibly important topic.
Thanks so much, Michael. We really appreciate you having us today and for everybody taking their lunchtime to join us. I'm going to do a quick introduction for us as we roll into the agenda, and then we'll keep rolling from there. Let's start with Emily.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Ehlers. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Iowa who focuses on Medicaid work, and I am the only one joining you today who's actually not part of the WIPA team. And I look forward to talking to you all a little bit later on.
Tammy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy Crouch. I'm a Community Work Incentive Coordinator at Disability Rights Iowa, which is a fancy way of saying that I'm a benefits planner. We help people with individual or disabilities figure out what's going to happen to their disability benefits when they go to work. And thank you for joining us today.
Jenny?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Lyons, and I'm also a CWIC at Disability Rights Iowa, and I'm based out of the Cedar Falls, Waterloo area.
Thanks, guys. And my name is Misty Johnson. I am also a Community Work Incentive Coordinator at Disability Rights Iowa. I think we added it all up, and you're getting about 40 years roughly of benefits planning team total today. So we hope we can answer questions at the end and get you through some information about Medicaid. Jenny, if you can go to the agenda slide, we'll start with that. We'll get rolling. So today we're going to talk a little bit about who Disability Rights Iowa is, who the Work Incentive and Planning and Assistance folks are, what that project really means, the demographics of Medicaid enrollees. We're going to talk a lot about our analogy of the House of Medicaid and eligibility groups, the current managed care organizations in Iowa, accessing the Medicaid applications, and Medicaid appeal rights. We're going to toss in a few things other than that as well, but we'll try to get through this in a timely manner and save our questions toward the end. Feel free to, like you were mentioned earlier, to either put those in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will be monitoring that as we go. Next slide. So to start us off, let's talk a little bit about Disability Rights Iowa. We are Iowa's protection and advocacy agency. Every state has a P&A, and Disability Rights Iowa is the place that is a nonprofit law center. We're not state or federal agency. We're independent, and we provide legal advice and assistance to Iowans with disabilities. We are kind of shifting our focuses to more systematic work. We still take some cases that are more individualized, but you'll also see us doing some of that systematic work as well. We serve all disabilities and all ages across all 99 counties of Iowa. Some of our other focus areas is not just benefits planning. We're a little piece of that pie. We do direct individual legal and systems change, like I mentioned, education and empowerment. We have investigations and monitoring of facilities across the state. We do a lot of outreach and training, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, how you can get your folks some more information, how you connect with our outreach coordinator. We also have the representative payee oversight team that goes out and audits different rep payees. That could be individual rep payees, that could be agency rep payees. And we also provide technical assistance when people have questions, ranging from everything ADA related to maybe accessibility or accommodations, a wide range of things that happens at Disability Rights Iowa. We have a lot of different things moving over there at our agency. Next slide. So who are we? The three of us are the Work Incentive Planning and Assistance team that is housed at Disability Rights Iowa. We're actually a grant-funded program through the Social Security Administration that provides individualized benefits planning to folks who receive disability benefits. And just to kind of break it down a little further than that, a person would have to be receiving a benefit on the Title II side of things. So that would be Social Security disability insurance, childhood disability benefit, maybe a disabled widow or widower benefit, or they would have to be receiving benefits under the Supplemental Security Income Program, SSI, due to disability. And really, we can start working with somebody very young, as early as age 14, and all the way up through full retirement age, which we know is kind of a moving target. Right now, that's about 67 and 10 months, give or take. And reminder, if you're watching this and it's not 2026, some of the numbers that we're going to be talking about today could be different. So please do your research and see what those numbers are for the year that you're taking a look and a listen to this presentation. Also, the other caveat to that is work has to be somewhere on that radar. So that could be somebody who's just starting that work journey, kind of thinking about how earnings might impact their benefits or other supports they're tapping into. They could already be working, or maybe they have a job offer pending or have a promotion that they could take, or they could even be doing self-employment. Any of those three would qualify somebody for our work incentive planning and assistance, or WIPA services, from our DRI WIPA team. And there are no costs to our WIPA services. That's funded through the Social Security Administration. Next slide, please. So what are some of our WIPA goals? One of those is to improve employment outcomes and to increase economic self-sufficiency for those Social Security disability beneficiaries that I mentioned earlier. So one of those things to think about is really the main goal is we want to make sure that beneficiaries have all of the information that they need to make educated decisions about the next steps for their employment. And that really means we want to make sure they have timely, accurate information that meets them where they're at. Next slide. So this whole webinar is about Medicaid, kind of a high level touch base on different aspects of what's happening with the Medicaid. So what is it? It's authorized by the Title 16 of the Social Security Act, which was signed into law in 1965 alongside Medicare. We always wonder who named these, right? Medicaid, Medicare. I'm not sure who was thinking of those names, but it's a program also that helps people who qualify to pay for their healthcare services or makes it lower cost for them as well. And each state has the opportunity to run that Medicaid more or less how they want, as long as it follows the rules of the federal government. There is no single Medicaid program for every state. So both federal and state governments help pay for that. They have a kind of a different percentage of share, if you will, into that Medicaid pool of money. So there's different coverage services and care depending on how you're getting into Medicaid, how that eligibility looks for you. So it can be a varied way that you are having premiums or not premiums. It's definitely an individualized situation for everyone. Next slide, please. So who is it that has Medicaid? So here is the list on the screen that the person could be age 65 or older. They may be blind or have a disability. They could have families with dependent children. They could be pregnant and have children up to age 21. Or they could be an adult between the age of 19 and 64. And that's really part of that Medicaid expansion population. And also, a person could have been in foster care all the way up to age 26. Individuals also are allowed access to Medicaid if they have breast or cervical cancer or pancreatic conditions or precancerous conditions when that is appropriate. And really, the most important takeaway about Medicaid is eligibility is based on financial and non-financial criteria. That could include income, assets, citizenship, Iowa residency, immigration status, and disability when it's used as a case-by-case basis. Like I mentioned, it's very individualized. No two cases are the same. Next slide. So we wanted to give you a little bit of demographics of who we are actually talking about when we say who gets Medicaid. This particular demographic you're going to find in that document that Michael talked about earlier. That's live on their website, like he mentioned. So really, there's a bigger myth about this, and we're going to talk about it in the next slide as well, is 87% of Medicaid enrollees, which are in that group that I mentioned that are 19 to 64, are already working part-time and full-time, at least an average of about 34 and a half-ish hours per week. At least that's the stats we got in 2021. And we know today in 2026, that's probably quite a bit higher. And you're going to see it's kind of a half and half mix of male, female. And really, there's a big coverage for children under the age 17 and elderly adults of 65 or older. So when we're talking about that 19 through 64 age, you'll see it's a smaller percentage, right around 47% that is talking about. And you can find this again in that publication. Next slide, please. So here is a little bit more of the, excuse me, working age Medicaid enrollees that are already employed. And we just wanted to make sure that you had this, and the citation is on the screen, but everything else is going to be found in that publication. So really, we just wanted to hit home that people are already working that are on Medicaid. And you'll see by the slide, most of those folks, 44%, are working full-time. And then we have the other part that's about part-time, and then it breaks down from there. So there's a bigger amount of people who are definitely working. It's definitely a myth that people aren't working who receive Medicaid. So we just wanted to make sure and share that with you today. Next slide. And I am going to turn it over to Tammy.
Thank you, Miss T. So yeah, my job here today is to talk to you a little bit about the House of Medicaid. So basically, we call it a house because Medicaid is like a house, and there's lots of doors to get into that house. And what what those doors mean are different eligibility criteria, asset limits, and different things like that. But once they get into that house, typically they get mostly the same services as any other Medicaid program. So we investigate, figure out what the eligibility criteria is for the person's specific need for Medicaid and try to fit them into one of these doors. And we're going to talk about some of these. Next slide, please. The first one we're going to talk about is Iowa Health and Wellness Program, or we lovingly call it IHOP. So this came about because of Medicaid expansion. It's for individuals ages 19 to 64, and this is not just a Medicaid program for people with disabilities. This is income-based. So someone has to have income at or below 133% of the federal poverty level for your family size. And for this year, that would be $21,227 a year, $1,769 a month. So if someone were making less than that, they could possibly qualify for Iowa Health and Wellness Program. Now, this medical program or this Medicaid program doesn't always play nice with other health insurance programs, so you have to not be eligible for any other Medicaid under the mandatory coverage groups. So if someone has Medicaid through SSI or they have Medicaid through MEPD, which is the Medicaid buy-in that we'll be talking about, then they couldn't qualify for Iowa Health and Wellness Program. And this Medicaid program doesn't always play nice with Medicare, so one thing that we're always doing is if someone has Iowa Health and Wellness Program, we're looking to see if there's other options for Medicaid if they're going to have Medicare, so that Medicare and Medicaid can work together. But we see this a lot for individuals who are not disabled and need Medicaid and are under that 133% of the federal poverty level. We also use this program a lot for people that are in that 2-year wait for their Medicare to start for SSDI. So it is very handy. Another thing is there's no asset limit that's tied to Iowa Health and Wellness Program. And a lot of the other Medicaid groups do have asset limits that we're going to talk about. There's no charges for health insurance or health services during a member's first year of enrollment. And beginning in the member's second year of enrollment, small monthly contributions may be required depending on completion of healthy behaviors and family income. So pretty much this is, I see that we do that amount again was $21,227 a year or $1,769 a month because we had a question in the chat. Next slide, please. So this is primarily one of the groups that we work with the most. This is SSI-based or 1619B Medicaid. And we'll talk about SSI-based Medicaid first. Now, SSI, basically, if you're unfamiliar with the disability groups, there's SSI and SSDI. Now, SSI is for someone who is disabled and hasn't earned enough work credits to qualify for SSDI based on their own work record or a parent's work record. SSDI, on the other hand, comes out of the General Retirement Fund. And that's for individuals who have paid in enough Social Security taxes that when they become disabled, they can draw that money down, or they have a parent who's retired or deceased that they can draw that money from. So SSI-based Medicaid is automatic. If someone in Iowa has SSI, they immediately get Medicaid. Again, that SSI is federal needs-based benefit administered by the Social Security Administration. And people with limited income and resources who are blind, age 65 or older, or having a qualifying disability can get this SSI benefit. It covers basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter, and funded by general tax revenues. And in most states, approval for SSI equals eligibility for Medicaid. And like I say, Iowa is one of those states. So if somebody has SSI, they're immediately going to get Medicaid. And it'll be SSI-based Medicaid. There's also a work incentive that's tied to this called 1619B Medicaid. And what this means is if somebody has SSI and they're working and get to a point of zero cash benefit on their SSI because of work activity, they still might be able to keep their Medicaid under this 1619B work incentive. as long as they still maintain the asset limit, the $2,000 asset limit that they have to stay under, and they meet all the other criteria for SSI. So 1619B is a very powerful work incentive. So it's a way that individuals can stay tied to their SSI benefit as well as keep their Medicaid coverage because they work to a point of zero cash benefit on their SSI. Next slide, please. Another group we work with is called Medicaid for Employed People with Disabilities, or MEPD. You might have also heard this as MEPID. And this is for individuals between the ages of 18 and 64 that are considered to be disabled based on Social Security criteria. So they do have to meet Social Security defined disability. They have to have earned income from wage or self-employment and not eligible for any other Medicaid coverage groups. There are limited exceptions for that. They have to have countable income of less than 250% of the federal poverty level for an individual's family size, and not all income is counted. So that's important to note. So they're not doing a dollar for dollar counting of the gross earnings. They're going to do the SSI calculation, which we can certainly help someone with if someone has any questions about MEPD to determine if they would be eligible. The asset limit for this Medicaid group is a lot higher. Many of the Medicaid asset groups or limits is $2,000 for MEPD. It's $12,000 for an individual or $24,000 for a couple, and a retirement account is excluded. And when it comes to assets, they're not counting, in most cases with Medicaid, they're not going to count one car and one house. So depending on what someone's assets are, we can look at that and say, okay, this would be counted and this wouldn't be counted. But up to $12,000 for an individual or $24,000 for a couple in assets for MEPD. Someone may have to pay a monthly premium based on their income. So even though they're not looking at the total gross income for the eligibility, that 250%, for the premium, they do look at the gross income. And for this year, if somebody were making less than $1,957 a month from their total gross income, then they wouldn't have to pay a premium for MEPD. If it's above that, then they would have to pay a small premium, and it's based off, it goes up according to somebody's income. This Medicaid group does play nice with Medicare. So a lot of times if someone's SSDI eligible and they have Medicare, we can use MEPD as a secondary insurance. Now, being an Iowa resident, another thing that's nice is if they have MEPD or they have Medicaid, it's going to pay that Part B premium for Medicare for them. And that this year is $202.90 a month for most people. So it's a way that they don't have to pay that full Part B premium because chances are their MEPD premium would be cheaper. So we use MEPD quite often, and this can also be used in that 2-year wait when somebody is waiting for their Medicare to start, if they have income from employment. So it's another great Medicaid group that we work a lot with. And we encourage you to reach out and ask us any questions you have about this group if you think you're eligible. Next slide, please. Another group that we work with is called Hawkeye or CHIP. This provides federal matching funds to states to provide health coverage to children and families with income too high to qualify for Medicaid, but who can't afford private coverage. So this is for children under the age of 19 and working families not enrolled in any other health insurance, and income at or below 302% of the federal poverty level, which can actually be quite high depending on your family size. So I always encourage people to look and see if they're eligible or if their children are eligible for Hawkeye so that they can possibly use this, as coverage because that income level can be higher. Premiums are based on family income. No family pays more than $40 per month, and some families pay nothing at all. So I would also encourage you to look on the HHS website if this is something that you think your children could access and use. It could be another option that someone can get their children covered for medical and even dental insurance. Next slide, please. Now, one of these things that we always look at when we're working with individuals with disabilities is waiver services. And we put this down as it's kind of like when you look at that house of Medicaid, this is kind of like the garage. So basically, HCBS waiver services, they enable individuals with disabilities to be able to get extra services beyond what just Medicaid covers. But Medicaid and waiver is tied together. So programs that provide service funding and individualized supports to enable disabled Iowans more choice about how and where services are received. So living in the community versus a medical institution, for example. So to get a waiver, someone must be determined financially eligible for Medicaid and meet the level of care requirements. And currently in Iowa, we have 7 HCBS waivers. We have the intellectual disability waiver, and you can see on this slide that's for anybody of any age. Brain injury waiver, which is the same, anybody of any age. Children's mental health waiver for kids who are under the age of 17. Elderly waiver for someone who's over 65. The health and disability waiver for someone between the ages of 0 and 64. The AIDS or HIV waiver, which is 0 to older. Again, there's no age limit there. And the physical disability waiver for people ages 18 to 64. And each of these waivers offer different services. So depending on what waiver someone's involved with, that's how we can tell what services someone will be eligible for. The two that we work the most with are probably the intellectual disability waiver and the brain injury waiver. And they do seem to cover more of the services that are needed for people with disabilities. Next slide, please. For some of the services that are covered under HCBS, and not all of these services are covered by each waiver, but there's adult daycare, personal emergency response, CDAC provider. So if somebody did have the correct waiver, they could have a CDAC provider who could be somebody that they know that is paid to help care for that individual. Pre-vocational, helping someone with a disability get ready for employment in the community. Dehabilitation, respite care, home and vehicle modifications if needed, supported community living, which is a big one, home health aides, interim medical monitoring and treatment, supported employment, which we work a lot with, nursing and transportation. So supported employment, those are things that a lot of times if somebody needs that service and they're tied to waiver, then we want to make sure that that waiver can stay intact so that they can continue to receive those supported employment services, and they helps them maintain their employment. So if somebody has a waiver, we're definitely looking at ways to keep that waiver active by, again, finding ways that we can work with Medicaid and waiver, because like I say, they go hand in hand. Next slide, please. Another group, and the last group I'll be talking about, is called 300% group. And basically, this is where someone with a disability who qualifies, they get Medicaid because they get waiver. So their only eligibility group where an individual becomes eligible for Medicaid because they are approved for a waiver, and waiver comes before the Medicaid. There are child and adult eligibility subgroups. So if someone's under age 18 and they have 300% group, they don't count assets. If they're over 18, then that asset limit is $2,000, with certain assets like a home, a car, and household goods excluded. Single applicant's monthly income cannot exceed 300% of the federal benefit rate of FBR, so for SSI. So it's not looking at federal poverty level. Is looking at 300% of the federal benefit rate for SSI. And this year, that's $2,982 a month. So if somebody is making less than that or has income less than that, they could qualify for this 300% group. If one spouse applies for a waiver, the other's income may be protected to a certain extent. And the 300% group, to give you an example of how this works, is if somebody does not receive Medicaid through SSI means and they're receiving SSDI, but they would still be eligible for SSI. But because they have SSDI and they need waiver, this is a group that they could qualify for. So if somebody is drawing off a parent's record and they would otherwise be eligible for SSI on their own record, then 300% group could be an option for them. But as you can see, Medicaid has a lot of different eligibility criteria. Each Medicaid group has its different asset limit. So it's very important for us to be able to look and see which door that individual has went through so that we can give them exact information on how much they can earn and how much assets that they can have, so that they don't risk losing their Medicaid or they can prepare to be in another Medicaid group. Next slide. And I think this is where I turn it over to Jenny.
Thank you, Tammy. So I'm just going to wrap up the last little bit about Medicaid, the various different groups. So I'm going to touch on habilitation services, or HAB. Now, going along with our analogy, remember, Medicaid's like a house. So in order to get access to the various services that Medicaid provides, you have to be able to get in some way, whether it's the front door, the side window, the back door, with each one having those different income and eligibility requirements that Tammy mentioned. Now, with Medicaid, it comes with those waivers, that being the garage. You can either access the garage because you went through a house, the house of Medicaid, or as Tammy just mentioned, with 300%, you got access to the garage and then was able to get Medicaid by going through the garage. Now, with habilitation services, this is where it can get a little confusing because habilitation services is not a waiver. In our analogy, we call it Medicaid shed, because in order to access HAB, you have to access Medicaid. You can't get the key to the shed if you don't already have a key to the house of Medicaid. So HAB provides home and community-based services for Iowans with functional impairments, typically what we see associated with chronic mental health illnesses. Now, HAB services are really great because they're designed to help people, similar to other home and community-based services, to get successfully residing within a home and community-based setting versus an institution. Now, this can provide participants with acquiring, retaining, and improving different self-help, socialization, and adaptive skills. So some of the services available are case management, home-based habilitation, getting that individual back into a home setting, day habilitation, and then what we see the most in our work is the pre-vocational services and supported employment. So maybe that individual who's receiving HAB needs help getting back to work. Maybe they need to review different career options, different skills needed for jobs, retrain for a different job. This is where we see that HAB resource become a very important benefit for those individuals, especially when we're talking about employment. So one of the big things that we like to highlight, because HAB and waiver are often confused, they're doing a lot of similar things, we like to highlight some of those major differences. So for HAB, or habilitation services, that's 150% of the federal poverty level. And not all of the income is counted. Like Tammy mentioned with MEPD, or Medicaid for employed people with disabilities, they use the SSI calculation where they're counting just under half of someone's earned income from work. With waiver, remember that's 300% of the SSI federal benefit rate. Now, as Tammy mentioned, that's how someone could access waiver. If someone's getting access to that house of Medicaid, they might have some different eligibility requirements, but as long as someone has access to Medicaid, they can access the garage, which are the waivers. Now, as you'll see, that habilitation services, that income eligibility limit is a lot lower than the general waiver one. The nice thing, though, is there is not a waning limit or any time frame that someone has to essentially be in limbo waiting for that approval. So if we're working with someone, they're receiving HAB, and they want to test out work, they want to attempt at a position that's opened up, they're often worried, what's going to happen. Now, with HAB, depending on how much they're earning, they could lose that service. However, they can automatically reapply and be approved for HAB without any waiting limit if things change. So if someone really wants to pursue that employment, I normally say go for it, test it out, and see, is there also, if they really need some of those services, are there other work incentives that we can talk about that might be able to help cover that? Or could that person self-pay? If ultimately maybe that job doesn't work out, that's where they can reapply and not have to worry about being able to wait to get those services back. The other piece, though, is we know with waiver that is not the case. There's varying lengths for those wait lists. The last we looked, that the intellectual disability and the brain injury waivers are sitting at about 5 to 7 year wait lists. So we know if someone's getting a waiver, we want to make sure that we're looking and knowing how are they getting into that house of Medicaid, because we don't want them to lose those services that are likely ensuring that they're able to work and live in their communities. So this is why it's important for us to know what someone's receiving services-wise, because it could look very similar, whether it's HAB or waiver, but the outcome could be very different if someone's earning over those income eligibility limits. So Tammy touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to highlight, when we're talking about resource and asset limits, the first fear we often hear if someone's wanting to apply is you can't have anything. And yes, there's resource and asset limits for a lot of Medicaid groups. Not everything is counted. So just to give a good overview, you can have a house as long as it's used as your principal residence. You can have one vehicle, regardless of the value. And Medicaid also isn't going to count any of your household goods or personal effects. You can also have burial accounts, trusts, contracts, or insurance policies as long as they're irrevocable. The idea being you can't easily cancel them to be able to get that money. You can also have burial spaces and markers along with life insurance, as long as the face value of all of those policies are less than $1,500. And finally, if someone's needing property for employment or self-employment, that can be disregarded as well. One of the big questions that we normally like to ask when someone's having questions about their assets, what could or couldn't count, can that item be easily liquidated into cash to cover those living expenses? The whole idea of a resource or asset is, can you cash that out? Can you get the value of it to then be able to cover, rent, mortgage, other bills, food, any of those basic living expenses? So that's why, especially like the irrevocable trust, is it set up in a way that you don't have easy access to it? Now, obviously, this isn't an exhaustive list. Everyone's situation is going to be a little different. So that's why we like to talk through what does someone have. And in the end, obviously going to defer back to that Department of Health and Human Services because there's so many specifics. But if someone has questions about what would or wouldn't count, we want to make sure we're part of that conversation when we're working with someone, because this could really change if they're eligible for Medicaid. So within Iowa, we have something called managed care or managed care organizations, MCOs. And going along with our analogy, if you know us enough, we like our analogies. With the House of Medicaid, MCOs are like that contractor. So if you're renovating your house, you have to have someone that's overseeing everything, making sure the various plumbers, electricians, the tiler, all are working together. Just like a contractor, that MCO is that health plan that coordinates care for a person enrolled in a Medicaid program. Now, when someone is approved for Medicaid, they're automatically assigned to an MCO. And currently, we have 3 different MCOs in Iowa. We have Iowa Total Care, we have Molina Healthcare of Iowa, Inc., and WellPoint Iowa Inc., which formerly was called AmeriGroup. Now, as you'll see from the graphic on the slide, this also is coming from that great publication from UpLift, a managed care breakdown just to see where does everyone fall. So it's about evenly split, about 27% with Molina, 31% with Iowa Total Care, and 34% with WellPoint. There is a very small population, 6%, that has fee-for-service, where there's billing directly with the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services. But as you'll see, the vast majority of individuals are assigned one of these managed care organizations. So I said they're a contractor, but what are their general responsibilities? So at minimum, they're required to cover all of the services that Iowa Medicaid currently provides. They are going to manage and coordinate that healthcare, and that would include physical, behavioral, and long-term care through their contracted providers. When they're providing that care, MCOs are also responsible to improve that quality and to control costs, to make sure they're connecting with providers and ensuring those costs are covered for their members. They're going to ensure members have access to a network of providers for their comprehensive health needs. The goal being that members have a choice of different providers readily in their community so they can access, as I mentioned, those physical, behavioral, and long-term care services. MCOs are also supposed to develop and monitor quality improvement policies and procedures to make sure that things are always improving. No one's perfect, but are there steps and policies in order to improve those services to its members? And then finally, pulling into what Emily is going to touch on in a little bit, MCOs should be providing timely and adequate notice and information related to that care and services. So if a member has a change in what is being covered, what services are being provided, or maybe a change in their provider, maybe that provider is no longer part of the network, that individual should be getting those timely notice so then that member can make choices related to their healthcare. So we've talked about Medicaid and how this could be a great resource for various individuals. So how do you apply? So the easiest would be going to the Iowa HHS online portal. Now this is a hyperlink to that online portal. So after this presentation, we are going to be sending out this slide deck, and so that way you can access that link. Now, if someone doesn't want to use that online portal or it doesn't meet their needs, they can also go to any of the HHS county office locations to get a paper application in person. There is also an email that's on the slide that individuals can use to email that application. And there's also a mailing address for a location in Cedar Rapids. Now, if someone does have access to fax, I know in 2026 that may be shocking, but they do accept fax. So if someone does have access to fax, and that is the most beneficial, especially if you are a provider, an employment specialist, and working with someone, if you can fax it, there are numbers. They are specific for every office. So if there's a specific county office you would like to fax to, I would recommend looking up that location and getting their direct fax number. So obviously, one of the big topics that get a lot of questions is about Medicaid appeals. So we're excited to have Emily be able to talk about something that's near and dear to her heart of what you should know as a provider, as a family member, so you can be prepared if you need to go through the appeal process.
All right. Thank you, Jenny, so much. So hi, everyone. Just a real quick reintroduction. My name is Emily Ehlers, and I'm a litigation attorney with Disability Rights Iowa. Just a very quick disclaimer. Everything I'm about to share today is for informational purposes only. This isn't intended to be specific legal advice. I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. So I'm going to be as quick as possible because there's still more information to cover, but I will try to get to any questions at the end. Next slide, please. Okay. So there are a couple different types of Medicaid appeals. As Jenny talked to us about, there are so many different ways to enter the House of Medicaid, which means all of those can have different appeal options. I will be fully transparent, honest with you. At Disability Rights Iowa, my practice has primarily focused on individuals who get those waiver services, those home and community-based service waivers and the services that go along with that, but we'll talk about the others as well. So essentially, you might get an eligibility denial, including a renewal. So maybe you've applied for Medicaid under one of those various doors to enter the House of Medicaid, or maybe you've been on Medicaid and you've had to do your annual renewal and that gets denied. You can appeal that decision. But then there are also service denials. So these the long-term supports and services, anything about durable medical equipment, assistive technology, or if you are on a waiver, maybe that's a home and vehicle modification. Next slide, please. Okay, so as Jenny set up for you, the very first step, if you've been denied and you would like to appeal, is that timely and adequate notice. This notice should come in the physical mail. And because of that, it's very, very important. I mean, very underlined 10 different times that you have your most up-to-date address with the Department of Health and Human Services, and if you have a managed care organization with your MCO. Now, if you are getting waiver services, if you have a case manager, they might know in advance if the services that you are seeking have been requested or denied. So they might tell you. And that's great to have advance notice, but that doesn't count as your official notice. You have to always get a physical written copy. Verbal notice is never sufficient. And that notice should include what's being denied and why it's being denied, along with references to the relevant code sections that allow for that denial to take place. Next slide, please. Okay. So after you got your notice, there are different types of appeals. There's a managed care appeal, which we call a first level appeal. And then there's something called a state fair hearing in front of an administrative law judge. We're going to talk about both of those in a little bit more detail and how they might work together. And so if you have a managed care organization, so you're on Medicaid and you have an MCO and you've requested a service and that gets denied, you have what's called a first level appeal, meaning that you appeal that denial directly to the managed care organization. So you have to file that appeal within 60 days of the date of the letter. So it's going to take a few days to get to you, but you have to pay attention to the date on the letter. Now, if the appeal is about benefits you're getting that you would like to continue while the appeal is in process, it's important to know you have to specifically request that those benefits continue. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. And then after that, you have the ALJ hearing. Next slide, please. Okay, so managed care appeals, we're going to go into those in a little bit more detail. So you've requested a particular service. Maybe you're on a waiver and you've asked for supported community living or CDAC, and the managed care organization has either denied or reduced that service. You have to appeal that within 60 days. If you want continuing benefits, you have to appeal it and specifically request continuing benefits within 10 days of the date of the letter or before the proposed change takes effect, whichever is later. Please note that it's possible that if you ultimately are determined to not be eligible for those services anymore, but you have had them continue, you might have to pay back those services. Now you get this notice. It's upsetting to see that the thing that you've requested has been denied or reduced and you want to appeal it. What do? First, I always suggest reading the notice you get in detail. They can be a little overwhelming sometimes because there can be a lot of paperwork in there, but read everything in detail. And then you're going to want to file your appeal in writing. This will vary depending the MCO. So, all that contact information for the MCOs was a few pages back. Make sure you look to see which address or email address you need to send this to. Write your appeal and include all of the reasons why you believe your managed care organization made the wrong decision. And if there are relevant records or documents, provide copies. So maybe you have medical records that you believe support your position, or you have some sort of billing record, whatever it may be, go ahead and include that with an appeal, but never send your only original copy. Make sure to send copies. The managed care organization will decide within 30 days and send you that notice in the mail. Next slide, please. Okay. So what happens after you do that and you get the decision from your managed care organization? So if unfortunately you appealed to your managed care organization and the decision wasn't what you hoped, there's still another level above that. That's when you can request a hearing in front of an administrative law judge. You have to request that hearing within 120 days of your MCO decision. And if you're requesting continuing benefits, you need to re-request that in the next level when you ask for that hearing. Please know that hearings are by default set on the phone. So all of the administrative law judges sit in Des Moines, and so they cover the whole state. And so when you ask for a hearing, it will automatically be set on the phone. But if you would like to have an in-person hearing, you have the right to request that. Again, that would be in Des Moines, but just when you ask for your state fair hearing, you're going to request that it's in person. All of the instructions on how to ask for a hearing are included in that appeal decision from your MCO. So again, it's really important you keep that notice and that you read it in full detail because it will give you instructions on how to ask for that next step, that hearing in front of an administrative law judge. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's say you've requested that hearing and you're moving on to the next step. The judges sit under the Department of Inspections and Appeals and Licensing, sometimes called DIAL. So you're going to get a detailed notice in the mail if you are granted a hearing. Read that notice very carefully. It's going to give you the date and time of your hearing. It's going to give you the name of your administrative law judge. It's going to give you the phone number to call into on the date and time of your hearing. It's also going to include instructions on how to submit evidence to the administrative law judge. All of that is on the back page of your notice. And you have to submit everything within 5 business days, so essentially a week, before your hearing date. And whatever you're submitting has to go to the other party as well, meaning your managed care organization. Some documents that you might want to consider are any sort of assessments or care planning or medical records. Maybe you have a provider or a physical therapist or OT or PT or speech therapist who are in support of your need for those services. You can either have them testify or write a letter of support. Maybe it's relevant financial documents if your hearing's about eligibility. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've submitted everything, you're ready to go, the date and time of your hearing has arrived, and we're going to presume that you're doing a phone hearing because most of them are. You're going to call in at the time of your hearing to the number that you were given. It's important to know that ALJs do not call you, you have to call in. The ALJ is going to get on the phone. They're going to basically take roll call, make sure all important and relevant parties are present. They will explain the procedure of the hearing and how the day is going to go, and then they're going to put everybody on the record. That means the hearing officially starts. Typically, the managed care organization or HHS will present their evidence first, and that's because in most circumstances they have the burden of proof. And they're going to tell their side of the story. They might present their evidence or their witnesses. Every hearing's a little bit different. But when they're done, you have the right to cross-examine or ask questions about whatever they just testified to. And then after the MCO is done or HHS is done, then you get to present your evidence, call your witnesses, etc. When you do that, I always recommend referencing back to what exhibits or documents you've already submitted. So if you're talking about a need for a particular service, reference back to whatever care plan or assessment or letter of support is relevant. It's important to remember, though, that the MCO or the HHS representative is allowed to cross-examine or ask questions as well. And sometimes the ALJs have their own questions, and so they might ask you too. Both sides will get an opportunity to present closing arguments. And it's important to know that the ALJs will not issue their decision at the time of the hearing, but they will send it in the mail following the hearing. Typically, ALJs will at the end say, okay, I have this address for everyone. Is this the right address to send things to? Because again, it comes in the mail. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you are one of those folks who's fee for service, or if this is not an MCO appeal, meaning this is about eligibility, then you do not have that first level of appeal. When you request an appeal, you're going to go straight to a hearing. Next slide. And then a question I think a lot of people have is, do I need an attorney? You absolutely do not need an attorney. You're not required to have an attorney at this hearing. Many, many people go to state fair hearings without a lawyer. That's very normal. But I like to think that attorneys can be really helpful to this process. We know it can be a little stressful and scary at times. And sometimes there can be attorneys that are a free resource depending on the issue. So my office, Disability Rights Iowa, we primarily take cases related to folks with disabilities on those HCBS waivers. We don't do eligibility cases, but we do those home and community-based service denials. And Iowa Legal Aid also does take some Medicaid cases. They have their own eligibility requirements, but it can be worth reaching out to them as well. My biggest piece of advice, though, is that if you want to pursue legal assistance, reach out as soon as possible. So when you get that first MCO denial, reach out to the legal resources you would like to pursue. The further along in the process it goes, the harder it gets for an attorney to be able to jump in and help. Next slide. Okay, my final piece of advice on this is, first and foremost, read your notices carefully, reread your notices carefully. If you have questions, go back to see if it's in your notice. Pay attention to the deadlines, because I have talked most specifically here about those home and community-based service denials, but the different types of Medicaid denials have different deadlines and time limits on them. The link that's listed here goes to the appeals informations and deadlines page of Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, so that if you have any questions about when something is due or what your timeline might be, you can consult that resource. Next slide. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Emily. So just to wrap things up, we wanted to highlight a couple additional resources. So we do have UpLift's website, so you can check out not only the publication, but learn more about this awesome pilot and the upcoming results. Our Disability Rights Iowa website, if you're not familiar with us and want to know more about all the different things that we can provide and how we can connect with you for support. We also have Iowa Medicaid's plans and programs. So if you are interested in learning more about these various eligibility groups that we talked about today, along with the various services and care that is provided through Medicaid, we have both of those links. And then we also have links for the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services appeals in general, and then also appeals regarding exceptions to policy. So we are happy to have been here. We want to open this up. We know we have some questions that were in the chat, but then also that were submitted prior to the webinar. So we're going to touch on various questions. If you have not put a question in the chat yet, please do that, and we are happy to touch on it and get any of your questions answered. So just jumping right in, Misty, I think you touched on this a little bit, but what is the most common misperception about Medicaid population that you would like to correct, either from your work or just in general?
I think we touched on it a little bit right at the beginning, is that the myth out there is that people who receive Medicaid don't work, or that they aren't eligible because they're working, and that it could not be farther from the truth. The statistics that we showed you today definitely show that many, many people who are tapping into Medicaid in Iowa are already working. Some of them are working at full-time level. It's a matter of supporting maybe health insurance that they already have, or boosting or accessing health insurance that maybe an employer covered plan doesn't cover those types of services. So that's one of the biggest myths that I can tell you about today.
Thank you. One question that we got in the chat, can someone who has MEPD, but they also have SSDI that's over that 150% of the federal poverty level, are there any exceptions if they need HAB services, but obviously their SSDI is over? And I know Tammy, you touched on MEPD, so I'll see if you wanna take a stab at that.
Sure. Yeah, so we do run into that a lot because HAB does have that 150% of the federal poverty level to qualify. And that does happen where someone's SSDI can take them over that 150% of the FBL. So unfortunately, there's really nothing you can do about that. They are going to do the HAB calculation. So pretty much they'll count all but $20 of the SSDI. And then they'll take the earned income if there is any and do the SSI calculation from there. So yeah, I mean, the thing about HAB is a lot of times there is no wait for HAB. So we always tell someone it's not like the other waivers where you have to wait a significant amount of time to get services. So if somebody needs HAB or they have HAB and they decide they want to go to work, they could always just try it, see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out and their income falls below that, they can reapply for HAB.
Thank you. So we have a couple related to MEPD. So Tammy, if you'd want to help clarify, we know this is one of our favorite work incentives.
Sure.
Can someone qualify for MEPD if they aren't receiving SSDI?
Well, they have to be Social Security defined disabled. So it is possible that someone could receive MEPD because of the fact that they're on SSI and they want the higher asset limit besides just the 1619B. I mean, keep in mind if someone has SSI and they're in cash pay status, they're getting Medicaid because of that. There's nothing they can really do. As far as the 1619B work incentive, where they work enough that their SSI check goes to zero, sometimes if they're tied to that 1619B work incentive and they want the higher asset limit, they can ask DHS to move them over. Another thing is that if somebody has SSDI and they work off of benefits and they had MEPD, they can ask DHS for an exception to policy, but I can't say everyone who asks for that exception would get approved for MEPD.
Thank you. Also related to MEPD, if someone has a different Medicaid eligibility group and they want or need to move over to MEPD, what does that process look like? Do they have to do anything specific? Can you touch on that a little bit, Tammy?
Yes, someone would have to request MEPD. It is not automatic. They do have a one-size-fits-all application for HHS when it comes to Medicaid and SNAP and CCA. So you kind of have to just go through the application and put MEPD anywhere you can on the application so they know that's what you're asking for. Technically speaking, it should be somebody's choice for them to be able to move from, let's say, 1619B Medicaid over to MEPD, but that's not always how it works. Sometimes, someone will have to be terminated from one status before they can move to another. So I would definitely reach out to the HHS customer service line if you have any questions about enrolling in MEPD. Look on the website and touch base with your managed care provider and let them know that you would like MEPD versus the other Medicaid group that you have. It just depends also on the Medicaid group that you have. Again, if you have SSI Medicaid, that's what you're going to have. If you have, so again, because there's so many doors to get into that Medicaid, you want to kind of look and see which door you're currently in and then figure out if you can go to a different door if you need to.
Thank you. Emily, we got a couple questions related to your part of the presentation. Just to maybe, since we touched on this a little bit, can you explain what that, touch more on that exception to policy and what those rights and process that they should be following if they do receive a denial for exception to policy?
Yeah, so if you are requesting a service that goes beyond what's traditionally supported by Medicaid, again, if I'm I work primarily in the waiver world. If I am requesting a number of service units that's over a limit, or if there's a member who's on a waiver that has a cap on services, a dollar cap on services, and they're requesting over that, what you do is you submit has always been called an exception to policy. I do believe we're now calling them waivers of administrative rules, but that's new. And it's all the same process. This is essentially you're asking the Department of Health and Human Services to approve something beyond what's required by Medicaid. Now, because this is above and beyond, you don't have those traditional appeal rights. That means that an ETP request, when you ask the director of the Department of Health and Human Services, that's granted at the discretion of the director based on many different qualifications and requirements that you can find online. But those decisions are non-appealable, meaning you can't get those in front of an administrative law judge. What you can do is request what's called a reconsideration. Basically, you go back and you say, Director, I know that you have reviewed this and you've made a determination. I'm asking you to reconsider that because, and explain that information and provide that additional evidence. You can find information on how to submit a reconsideration on the appeals page for HHS, which we linked in the other resources there. And again, I would encourage, if you are requesting a reconsideration for whatever type of ETP request it could be, to provide all the additional evidence you can and about why you're seeking that ETP and why no other option available to you will meet that person's needs or requirements, because ETPs really are the absolute last resort.
Thank you. Another question that we got regarding denials, and maybe you could touch on this. What should you do if you receive a denial from your MCO, but there's not a postmark on the envelope and that date to respond has passed? Are there any options?
Well, without knowing the specifics, and again, I can't get into specifics right here and right now. It's hard to know, but what I will tell you is what matters most is not necessarily the postmark, but what the date of the letter of the notice. So that's where all of the timelines run from, is that date on the letter. We typically do encourage folks to keep their letters or keep their envelopes for the postmark, just in case something happened and maybe it got held up for several weeks in some way or shape or form for some reason. That's really pretty rare. But it really matters about the date on the letter, the notice itself. If that timeline has passed and you have a case manager, I would encourage that person to go back and talk to the case manager about what those options are. But if you were to file an appeal right now, it would not be successful because that timeline has passed and you have that 60 days. And so that's really, and if it has to do with a service from a medical provider, you can speak to your provider. I can't really get into more details without knowing more, but it's important to keep an eye on those deadlines.
Thank you. And one other one that came up, are there any specific timelines or dates that someone regarding their case manager / the MCO that they should be following when there's changes? So if a change is happening, someone should be notified within X date of that change, I think is where they're going with it.
That's hard for me to know without knowing more specifics. But you are, like, if you're having a service, if you're requesting a service to be approved, you have to be notified in advance. You can't on February 24th be told retroactively that your services are being denied or reduced. You have to be told in advance.
Thank you. Misty, we had several questions that came in regarding how Medicare and Medicaid works together. I know we touched on in the presentation that you can have both, but any clarification you can provide about having Medicaid as that secondary insurance?
Sure, great questions. And I will say the questions in the chat too, if we don't get to your questions, we're going to compile those and make sure we get answers to you after the webinar as well. As far as Medicare and Medicaid working together, they can absolutely do that. Medicare is usually your first payer. So whatever doesn't get covered by Medicare, then Medicaid would kick in at that point. So think of maybe prescriptions or some of those copays. Those would be covered on the Medicaid side of things versus Medicare in most cases. One of the big ones too is if you are receiving both Medicaid and Medicare, Medicaid in Iowa will pay for that Part B Medicare premium, which this year is over $200. So that is a big one for a lot of folks. But just think of it as second payer to Medicare. And if there is an employer plan involved in there, then it's third payer as well.
Another question for you, Misty, especially because I know that you've dealt with this a little bit in the past, but there's a question about if the federal poverty level calculation is in dispute, a member's being denied, is an appeal required or should the party deal directly with HHS caseworker? Obviously can add Emily into this, but I know you've had some past experiences, especially with HAB.
Yeah, that's a great question. My usual suggestion is start at the case manager. It might be that the case manager doesn't even know that there's a HAB calculation, for example, or that maybe the timing is just so that the numbers have changed for that year. And keep in mind, the HAB calculation looks very similar to an SSI earnings calculation. So there's some disregards that are applied in there. And some case managers may not know that. So my first suggestion is start at the case manager level and then work your way up to that. If it's still looking like that it is a denial, then move forward with that other process. Emily, would you say that would be the best way to go? Keeping in mind the dates, obviously.
Yes, of course. I mean, if it's something that you think can be easily resolved with a case manager, that's always the easiest step, right? But if you get a full-on denial notice, you can always appeal that and take that to the next step. And then if it has to do with the calculations, you can present that in front of an administrative law judge as well.
Another question that we had come in, and I'll open this up to Misty or Tammy, whoever would like to jump in. Is there a way to expedite waiver services if someone's on the wait list and they're receiving supportive employment but have exhausted other funding services available and they risk losing their job and independence? Knowing that this is obviously specific to someone's case, is there any guidance or any thought regarding if someone's on a wait list for a waiver and there's concerns about them losing job or other support without that waiver?
I can take this one. So I guess the short answer to that is there a way to expedite, waiver services? Not really, or everybody would be doing it, but supported employment services as a benefits planner, I'm going to look and see what other options do we have. Would they be eligible for habilitation services? Because supported employment services can also be covered by HAB. Rather than looking at like the brain injury waiver or the intellectual disability waiver that have extensively long lists. Another thing I would do as a benefits planner is look to see if we can use a work incentive to help fund their supported employment. There are work incentives that are tied to SSI and SSDI. One would be an impairment related work expense, depending on what their earnings are. On the SSDI side, if they were working above substantial gainful activity level, we might be able to use an impairment related work expense where they're paying for their own supported employment service and we're able to deduct that off their countable earnings. On the SSI side, we can also use an impairment related work expense where we use that in the calculation where if they're paying for that out of their own pocket, then we can deduct that over their countable earnings in the calculation for SSI, so then they can fund it themselves and it won't cost as much. Another option would be a PASS plan, a plan for achieving self-support. So if they can use a PASS plan, then we can ask Social Security, depending on their situation, to allow them to have a PASS plan to fund supported employment to help decrease their overall need for disability benefits and increase their earnings. So those are the options we would look at first before dealing with any sort of waiver situation.
Another question that we had come through, someone asked if a parent is making too much where I think they're saying their child wouldn't get SSI benefit, would they lose Medicaid? Maybe Tammy, since you were talking about SSI, can you touch on maybe what that experience is if maybe a child isn't eligible for SSI because of their parents' earnings and how that might change in the future?
Yeah, we would definitely, I mean, with Medicaid, it is always the payer of last resort, and they're looking at earnings and asset limits. So it depends on the situation. That is a very hard question to answer without knowing the individual situation and the family's overall financial and asset situation. So we would have to look and see if that child could fit into any door with Medicaid, because again, there are some groups where asset limits are not, counted, or they're not considered resources if they're under 18, and it's different if they're over 18. So again, there's too many scenarios in that situation that are what ifs, and we would have to look at that individual situation specifically to give you more of a definitive answer.
Another great question. Someone commented that they would love to connect with someone to present virtually for social workers at the VA in Central Iowa, and how we talk about connect with veterans. So Misty or Tammy, one of you want to talk about how maybe they could connect with us in the future and why veterans are such an important part of our work?
Misty,
Yeah,
you
I
want
can take
that?
that one.
All
Sure.
right.
Sure. And you guys are having great questions. I'm seeing them roll through the chat and the Q&A. We love all the questions. So we would be happy to do a virtual presentation. Veterans are actually one of our benefits planning team's target areas. So we can talk with veterans about how to navigate that complex system along with disability benefits from Social Security. If you want to reach out to our outreach coordinator at Disability Rights Iowa, you can absolutely do that. It'll be a main number that we'll have at the end of the slides, and let them know that you'd like the WIPA team to come and talk about benefits planning and more on Medicaid to the VA. We're happy to do that.
Thank you. Another question we got that we actually hear a lot, maybe Tammy, if you want to jump in, can someone be on a waiver and receive HAB at the same time?
That's a really good question. And I want to say I'm honestly not 100% sure on that. I would say
I
it's
can jump in.
possible. Yeah, go ahead. I think we just had that
Yeah,
question.
you can absolutely do both. You can absolutely do both, especially if your earnings are such that you meet the income requirements for HAB and still have waiver services. Sometimes those employment services, depending on which waiver you're tapping into, are already going to be able to be provided underneath the waiver, but you can have both at the same time because they do cover a little bit different services depending on which waiver you're tapping into. So short answer, yes. But it
And
depends.
and just to jump on what Misty said, I would also encourage folks, if you work with individuals who you think might qualify for HAB but are not currently utilizing it, to look into it a little bit more, talk to a case manager about it, because it is sometimes a way to meet the needs of folks, supported employment or otherwise, when other services might be harder to come by.
Awesome. Well, I want to make sure that we have some time to do some wrap up. If you did not get your question answered, we are going to be reviewing, but please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy, especially if you have a more specific situation. We know that there's a lot of details that might really change, and so we'd happy to talk about that more, but I want to pass it over to Ashley so she can wrap up and provide some great reminders about UpLift.
So much, Jenny. Wow, it is so clear there is so much expertise in this virtual room. So I want to thank everyone today. Before we close, I just have a few things. So thank you to Missy, Tammy, Jenny, Emily. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us and for serving Iowans in such a meaningful way. Thanks to our ASL interpretation team and captioning team for making today's webinar accessible. And to all of our attendees, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us and for digging into this really important topic. So here on the slide, before you go, we would love it if you would take our post-event survey. It shouldn't take any more than 5 minutes to complete, and these responses help us craft meaningful and engaging content for future conversations. You can do that by scanning this QR code that you see on your screen here, or there should be a link in the chat for you to do that. We'll be sending out a follow-up email. It will have all copies of the slides, a recording of today's webinar, a copy of that publication that we keep referencing, and all the materials will also go live on our website within a few days at upliftiiowa.org. That way, if you lose that email, they're going to live on our website for you to get to at any time. DMU is our CME provider, so you're going to receive a certificate of attendance within the next 30 days. If you have any questions or concerns about those credits, please reach out to cme@dmu.edu. Again, that's cme@dmu.edu. You can also reach out to the UpLift team, and we're happy to connect or answer those questions best we can. Next slide. So finally, stay engaged with us. UpLift's final findings are coming in June. That has been the culmination of almost 4 years of a research study, really talking about the specifics of poverty and what's happening here in Central Iowa. We want you to join that conversation. We want you to get access to that research and data. So be sure to get your spot in that conversation by subscribing to our newsletter at upliftiiowa.org and follow us on social media. We've got both UpLift's contact information and DRI's contact information. Misty discussed reaching out to that outreach coordinator. You can call that 1-800 number there to get connected. We're so grateful for your time and engagement. Thank you for taking the time to tune in, and we can't wait to see you at our next community conversation. Have a great day and take care of each other.